Chris O'Connor here. Join our fabulous curmudgeonly community on Facebook at facebook.com/group/curmudgeonrock. Also look out for a Spotify playlist dedicated to this episode. Now, let's get started.
This is the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and this is your podcast made by rock geek iconoclastic outsiders for rock geek iconoclastic outsiders. For those of you who lament that rock music has gone the way of jazz and slipped into niche genre status, we are here to keep that flame alive by providing insight, analysis, recommendations, and honest takes, not hot takes. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some rock history you never knew before. Any longtime listeners of this podcast will know that there are certain bands and artists that we idolize among all others. After all, we named this podcast after an obscure Nirvana B-side. One of those is unquestionably Neil Young. While I consider myself a huge fan, all his music from 1969 to 79 was golden and monumentally important, and his 1990s output was almost as great. The other curmudgeon in this podcast, Chris, is a bona fide Neil Young-ologist. Uncle Neil has a huge hardcore following that shows itself all over the internet and social media, but Mr. Christopher O'Connor's knowledge of all things Neil ranks right up there with the best of them. The reason I mention this is because it's pertinent to this episode, which will cover Neil Young's Archives series. Since 2009, Young has been consistently releasing both previously unreleased studio recordings and extremely well-recorded live performances that span his entire career. The volume of such rivals what the late Prince reportedly still has locked up in his vault. The unreleased studio work has so far been released as 2 volumes, each a multi-disc box set, the first covering 1963 to 72 and the second covering 1972 to 76. The third multi-disc box set is due to come out hopefully before the year ends, hence the impetus for this episode. The live performances have so far, the key words being so far, been released as 17 live albums classified as the quote-unquote performance series. I have several of these in my personal collection, so I can attest to their brilliant quality. But if you don't want to scour through every single disc of the box sets or all of the live releases, have no fear, the Curmudgeons are here. In particular, Chris will provide a public service by giving you his expertly picks from both the studio and live recordings of Young's daunting archive. And of course, I'll be here to give my feedback. If you're worried about access to these recordings, here's a hint. Everything is on YouTube. Trust me. So, without further ado, welcome to the Curmudgeon Rock Report, the best of the Neil Young archives so far.
So, Art, Neil Young is always an interesting guy to follow, and he's made some news this week. One, he's announced he's boycotting Twitter, or X, or whatever Elon Musk calls it, because of Musk's anti-Semitism. And so Young is taking another stand that doesn't really mean much of anything, at least fiscally. But then also he's getting praise for that. But on the other end, he's getting flack because apparently he played a private party held by the billionaire owner of clothing company Canada Goose up there north of the border. So,
he's doing his patriotic Canadian duty.
Yeah, for a billionaire at a private party
in Canada, so it's okay, right?
Yeah, the story I read about it says that these billionaires and these money guys are willing to spend big money. Like the rapper Flo Rida, I guess, is making a killing playing bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. Yeah, go.
Well, he's not having any hits, so he might as well do that.
Yeah, well, but the hits he has, I mean, they made him a lot of money and they're making him a lot of money in licensing. But
Yeah.
anyway, we're not talking about Flo Rida. We're talking about Neil Young on this episode. Uh, Arturo alluded to it in our opener. He's a personal hero of mine. So this has been a fun couple of weeks immersing myself in these archives. The aim has not been to find the best per se, but the stuff that's most interesting to me, and 10 records and 10 volleys from his archives that I feel tell a story. So that's really what we're doing. Any thoughts, additional thoughts about the archives before we get going?
Yeah, it's a lot to plow through. Unfortunately, they're all like pretty much everything's on YouTube. So you pretty much go and check it out on your own. But it's a lot to plow through, and I'll give my thoughts when I lead us into this list of your choices, Chris. But
Sure.
Needless to say, it's frustrating to go through in a good way because of how much stuff that he's just like he's pulled behind and stashed that he should not have stashed.
Hey, he's a modern day artist. Who needs quality control anymore? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But
I know. I mean, yeah, he's a pioneer of what King Gizzard is doing now.
yeah, pretty much. Although he never did it 5, 6, 7 times a year.
Yeah, right.
He wanted to, but that's why he had a label.
Right.
You know where they don't really have quality control problems, and all the stuff that flows is gold rather than shit, right?
Gee, where is that?
That is a place we know as the parallel universe. Yes, folks, we are crossing over into the space-time continuum, other side of that continuum, and things over there are noticeably different, as in blue is green and black is white. But not only that, but rock is still predominant. Long live rock. Well, there it is longing and living, and still rocking out, and it's the hits, and rock artists are still the cultural, or the leaders of the cultural zeitgeist. Long way of saying this is a segment in which we cover new and newish records by contemporary artists we think that you should know about and go check out and go dig yourself. That said, Arturo, who are you introducing to the masses in this episode's parallel universe?
Yes, in a parallel universe where good music is really in the mainstream, Jamila Woods would be a star, I think. She has an album, came out this year, called Water Made Us. It's her second or third, I think it's her second one. Hailing from Chicago, Jamila Woods, she's an R&B soul singer, songwriter, who manages the rare trick of crafting a thoroughly modern R&B sound with a very strong pop sensibility. Managing the peaks and valleys of romantic relationships and dealing with expectations before embarking on relationships are hardly the most original lyrical themes, especially in a genre so romance-obsessed as R&B. But when Woods sings the songs with such conviction and such a subtly tender voice, and when the songcraft is this strong and supported by crisp production, the tried and true lyrical themes and tropes seem refreshed. She also doesn't suffer from musical ADD, like so many artists these days do. She doesn't feel the need to stuff her music with as many shifting rhythms and complex chord progressions as possible. Woods knows the value of tastefully writing the groove and keeping it simple. The song Tiny Garden is one of the most sublime slices of R&B pop you'll hear all year, with an earworm chorus. Wolf Sheen sees Woods pulling out the acoustic guitars and delivering some great folk soul. Boomerang and Still are the kind of indie pop inspired soul that The Weeknd wishes he could do as well. Head First, which closes the album, is R&B soul as mantra, a sensual plea for emotional disarmament that's really affecting and really tender and endearing, actually. And all of this done in the name of the redemptive power of love. It sounds cheesy, but she does it well, and she executes it well and convincingly. This is just a really rock solid, mostly airtight R&B record that gets better with each listen. I give it a solid 4 out of 5 stars. Chris?
Yeah, I will give it up to her for her relative minimalism compared to some of her contemporaries, as you
Yeah.
said. Problem with that, though, is that at least the first half of the record suffers from some sameness.
Mm.
And not only that, but she has this penchant for these short spoken interludes and diversions from the proceedings, which kind of drag things down. And so I'm not necessarily as enthusiastic about this record as you are. However, there are a couple of great songs on the second half. I especially like Thermostat,
Mm.
which is a nice, strong, great bedroom soul, and just great romantic longing, and with a superb groove. And then there's also a song called Boomerang, which is up tempo and dancey and a little bit electric, but not to the realm of the cheesy '80s revival. It's
Yeah.
if anything, it's a little bit of Rockwell. It's not too bad.
I never thought I'd say this, but I'd rather listen to Rockwell than The Weeknd.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Rockwell. Yeah, as compared to The Weeknd, yeah, for sure. Who did it better? Rockwell. That's a sad commentary. Anyway, I so yes, I think that this album is worth a listen. I don't think it's that great, and maybe I need to give it a couple of more listens. The potential's there. The couple of good songs are there. So let's see what happens. Let's move on to my recommendation, or my album for this episode. This is from a 69-year-old bluesman originally from Louisiana. His name is Robert Finley, and the album is called Black Bayou. So, as I said, Finley is 69 years old. He is a late, quote unquote, discovery of the erstwhile white blues revivalist set, otherwise known as the white guys that go out and find these old black artists and give them a platform. And this happened for him in 2015. He was discovered outside of a show in Arkansas. At the time, he was busking. Apparently, he is legally blind. He was part of the army band when he was stationed in Europe in the early 70s, and he made a living as a carpenter while performing, but then he went legally blind and went the way of the busker set. But he gets discovered in 2015, and has released 4 records since then. Also made an appearance and made it to the semis of America's Got Talent, of all things, in 2019. So there's a little bit of trivia about that. That's probably where, like, most people in the country would know him from or remember him from. But anyway, he has survived his brush with cheeseball NBC fame, and now has this record out called Black Bayou. This is quite an orthodox blues record. He's delved in soul as well, but here it's a pretty solidly 12-bar blues type of record, and accompaniment there. He's a solid guitar player. He's got a really growly, really visceral voice, and he sings these songs and plays these songs like he really, really, really means them. But here's what makes this sort of unique. One of the things that's propelled him into this status as growing status as an indie darling is his association with Dan Auerbach of the Black Keys. After he released his first record in 2016, Finley, that is, he was connected with Auerbach, who has produced his albums since then. Also, occasionally bringing in Patrick Carney, the great drummer from the Black Keys, and Carney ends up playing on 4 songs on this record. Highlights: a song called "Sneaking Around," which is an orthodox boogie blues. Carney's on drums, soul burning vocals, and just a lot of fun. Another fun track called "Can't Blame Me for Trying," which is a really slinky blues rocker, strong backbeat, clearly backed by Auerbach on rhythm guitar. Auerbach is a very distinctive guitar player, but the very soulful playing, and the lyrics are an amusing reaction to romantic rejection. The solos have real bite to him. He's a guy that he combines muscle and melody really well. He's not that showy of a player. He's Yeah, it's convention in the sense it's 12 bar blues, but he has his own little style where it's more melodic than you might think. Two other songs to mention: "What Goes Around Comes Around," which is more of a soul number, but it's a hard rocking number, and it's a sneering, almost gleeful ode to revenge. The sharp solos are really tucked deep into the grooves. It's really a case of the guitar riding the bass and drum rather than the other way around. And then the album closer is just really amusing. It's a 6 minute long, almost folk tale, backed by slow blues called Alligator Bait, in which Finley tells the story when he was a kid, how his grandfather used him as live bait to hunt and kill an alligator. Basically made him stomp out in the mud and step on the alligator and just stand real still while Grandpa shot the alligator. And then it goes into how he tried to tell on his grandfather to his father, and his father laughed his tuchus off. And a great lyric on that: "I was just a lad, but I was old enough to get mad." So fun listen there. All around, I would say it's a good 3.5 star record. It's notable, and it'll make its rounds, I think, in the indie hipster circuit, deservedly so. It's a fun kick-ass record. I think fans of the Black Keys will dig it, especially because of the Auerbach and Carney participation in it. Arturo?
Yeah, this is a solid, well-done Southern blues album. I particularly like the swampy groove of Living Out a Suitcase and the folky, funky gospel blues. My only real complaint is that as a vocalist, Finley can be a little too histrionic, a little too overwrought, like he's trying too hard to convince us of his blues credentials. Raw! This album came out, like you said, on Eagle Eye Sound, which is the record label owned by Dan Auerbach of the Black Keys. Like all the blues and old school R&B soul albums that Eagle Eye Sound releases, none of them are bad, but none of them are particularly great either. They're groovy, they're cool to have in the background, they sound good, but they ultimately don't leave much of a lasting impression, nor do they beckon repeated listens. Just like every other Eagle Eye Sound release, it's just pretty good. Okay, what's next?
Chris here again. We usually end our episodes by inviting you to join our Curmudgeonly community page on Facebook. Well, we're picking up our efforts there. Know people just as passionate as us about rock and roll? Invite them to join in the fun. You don't actually need our permission to do so. Also, expect to see a lot more content up there moving forward. Our mission is to engage you, so darn it, we'll engage you like a fire hose, or maybe like a firehouse if we're going to give love to Gene Simmons. We may also be making a few offers. Want to wear a t-shirt featuring our logo? You may have that opportunity soon. So be a fellow curmudgeon, help us expand our little community, and share your own musings via your own posts. We're at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock.
So it's pretty well established and well known that Neil Young is one of the most prolific artists in rock, or not just rock, but music history, period. I mentioned that he has so much stuff that he has never released that he has kept in his personal archives. And like I said in the parameter setter, he started releasing all this stuff, both live and studio, in 2009. And the thing about it is that it's infuriating as a Neil Young fan, which, I mean, Chris, you're the Neil Young fanatic. I'm just a really strong fan. But even then, it's really infuriating for me that, considering so much crap he put out in the 1980s and post 1990s, that so much great material was held back. Instead, so much stuff was held back in favor of much, much, much inferior stuff that he would actually put out. It's really infuriating. And I think it's a good thing he's releasing these archives because, number one, we get to see what he held back. Two, it's an alternative to like the horrible new music that he's been putting out since since the mid to late noughties. So that's just why I'm really fascinated by Neil's archives, even if I don't really delve into them as much as a hardcore Neil fan does. Occasionally, I'll peek in to see what's there. For example, like the Way Down in the Rust Bucket live set from 1990, because I'm a big fan of the Ragged Glory era Neil Young, things like that. So what we're doing here is that since, Chris, I defer to you when it comes to all things Neil Young. So basically, Chris, like I said, I defer all things Neil Young. I defer to you. Chris, you are going to introduce not necessarily the 10 best of the archives, but going from the oldest releases to the newest releases in the archives so far. That's the key. Those are the key words. So far, from the oldest to the newest releases that tell a story of these archives, both live and previously unreleased studio recordings. Right, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. So the spirit of the archives, yes, as you said, Arturo, it's twofold. One, it is an actual archive, and so sort of him curating the best of what he considers the best in terms of his live output and his live recordings, and then also his unreleased studio stuff. So this is Neil Young controlling. A lot of this stuff has been out there in various forms for years as bootlegs, or there's been myth about some of these, but this is Neil Young getting to be the official curator of his own catalog. So it's kind of like the Neil Young Museum. So there's that fascinating part. And then you also hit a really strong point, which is to say that there's this golf ball sized hole between 1980 and 1989 or 88, basically the 80s, where he was in a real creative funk. And he was, with the exception of Trance, which Arturo and I both love from '82.
I'm not a fan of that record.
Oh, I thought you always liked that record.
No, okay. Never liked that.
No, I love it. But with the exception of that, he put out some really god awful concept records. One, a rockabilly record. One, an old school country record. A really uninspired Crazy Horse record. A jazz record, which has a couple of amusing songs, and one great song, which. Or actually one great song that came out of that wasn't released on the album, but ended up on Freedom, Crime in the City. Right. So it kind of makes kind of writes the record in the sense that, he did hold back some stuff. And that becomes apparent when he releases some of these things from the 70s that, some of these things didn't see the light of day until either the very late 80s or the early to mid 90s. And so, he is sort of correcting the record, and he is doing a make good in acknowledgement of that drop off. So really interesting stuff. And like Arturo said, I think that there is a story to be told where you see the evolution of Neil as an artist, as a performer, as a songwriter. You see him in his various periods, and you see his peaks, and you see his re-peaks, and then you see some tendencies that Neil had, one of which we'll name here. He had this really annoying tendency to shelve good albums in favor of not so good albums.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
He did that. He did that several times in the 70s. He did it a couple more times in the 90s and in the early 2000s, as we'll discuss. So to really get going, so I've picked 10 records, not necessarily the best, but ones that fascinate me, that I find really, really interesting, that help tell this story. And I guess, as in any story, we should start pretty close to the beginning. Yeah. And this is a disc. It's never been formally released. It's disc 3 of volume 1 of the archives. That's something we should mention, that there's 2 box sets that Neil has released over the last 15 years. One of the volume 1 covers the years 1963 to 1972, and volume 2 covers the years 1972 to 1976. Both box sets are 10 discs in total. So this one that I'm talking about first is disc 3 of volume 1 of the archives. This is a show known as Live at the Riverboat that was recorded in February of 1969 at a coffee house in Toronto. And this is fascinating because let's just put it this way: Neil ends this set by taking an audience request, and so this is Neil. He's 23 years old at the time of this recording. He's still trying to find his footing as a solo artist. He even says at one point in his sort of uncomfortable banter with the audience that hasn't played that many shows on his own and is still kind of finding his way. And you can tell at various points in the recording he complains about the humming in his mic, and he also asks for a change in the lighting as well. And he tries to tell stories, but it really comes across as like dopey hipster, like stoner kind of stuff. And so just really kind of not standoffish, but almost like, charmily goofy. But he gets into this album, and at the time, he's still kind of doing things not, a little bit more conventionally. He's really trying that. He became known for his first take vocals, where it was more about the feeling than anything. But at this point, he's still singing for real. Yeah. And the vocals here on Live at the Riverboat are absolutely just gorgeous. And he's got a cover that Buffalo Springfield did this cover. It's an old Guess Who song called Flying on the Ground is Wrong, which the original by the Guess Who, which, Western Canada's finest Bob Dylan ripoffs. It's very garage poppy. In Neil's hand, it becomes this beautiful folk ballad that just has this real emotional depth befitting of its translator. And then there's also an unbelievably beautiful rendition of Broken Arrow, which was one of his foremost songs that he did with Buffalo Springfield. And so gone are the sound effects and sort of the grandeur with the strings and all that. And it's just him and his guitar. Worth pointing out that it's only his guitar, no harmonica. So it's just acoustic guitar and Neil's voice, and just really, really lovely. And then, like I said, at the end, he takes a request for Expecting to Fly, which is another one of his minor Buffalo Springfield hits. And it's just kind of funny to hear him do that, as if he's just like some dude like collecting quarters and taking tips.
Especially a song like that. It's so heavily orchestrated and produced on the Buffalo Springfield album.
Right, exactly, with the Jack Nietzsche string arrangements and everything there. But here it's just him and a guitar. And so this is a testament to Neil's original earnest and aloofness, but also to the fact that when he sang with purpose, he was just a lovely, beautiful singer. Yeah. And, his voice just carried a real resonance to it. And this is just, this is an early snapshot of where Neil was as a solo artist from February of '69. Arturo, any thoughts?
Yeah, this is Neil performing in front of what, 50 people?
Something like that. Yeah.
I think the reason his voice sounds so good here is because this is still very, very early in his solo career, and it hasn't really taken off yet. Therefore, the months and months of the yearly tour grind haven't yet taken a toll on his voice and hardened it yet. Also, the between-song banter isn't quite as clever, nor as confident, nor as smooth as it would be just 2 years later, when his career has properly taken off and he's playing bigger venues to many more people. Also, the material in his solo acoustic shows would drastically improve as he would start making one classic album after another, or, as this archive series shows, one unreleased classic album after another. That being said, this is still a nice little oral document of an artist on the cusp of greatness, akin to some bootlegs out there of the embryonic Led Zeppelin playing in small clubs in late 1968, or the Doors performing at the Matrix Club in San Francisco in early 1967 before they exploded in popularity. The latter album, by the way, by the Doors, the latter is digitally remastered and released earlier this year, by the way. I like this Live at the Riverboat, but when it comes to solo acoustic, Neil, I'll take the Toronto at Massey Hall show from 1971.
Yeah, you and a lot of other people would take that show, and that's very, very good. Not quite as good as another one of his solo acoustic shows from around the same period that I chose for this list, but that's the one that most people, if they've heard of anything from the archive, there's two records in particular that they would know of. Massey Hall is one of them. One thing I'll say about Live at the Riverboat, that's the best of his early output. I mean, are the songs here as strong as the stuff that would come just a couple of years later? No, but you still have the Old Laughing Lady, you still have Sugar Mountain, which as we find out from the banter on here and on another record, he not a huge fan of, but it's still one of his best early songs. And then a couple of songs from his debut record, and some Buffalo Springfield stuff. And so it's the best of early Neil, but this is, again, it's just the non-confident banter and the just beautiful vocals. That's why you need to check this out. So as we know, 1969 was really a seminal year for Neil, because he starts it in that, he's just getting started and just finding his footing. And at some point along the year, a little bit later on in the year, he hooks up with this band, this Bay Area band called Crazy Horse, that was fronted by a very talented guy named Danny Whitten, and featured his bandmates Billy Talbot and Ralph Molina on bass and drums. Well, he hooks up with them and finds a real inspiration in the sort of the countryish rock, sort of more sort of freestyle. He starts to find himself more as a soloist, as an electric guitar soloist. And he releases, obviously, later in that year, Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere, which is an absolute classic. It features Down by the River and Cowgirl in the Sand. And Cinnamon Girl. And Cinnamon Girl. And so from that, he was able to start, his profile went up, and he was able to start touring theaters. And one of these early shows is documented on the next record that we're featuring from the archives. This actually, it got a standalone release, I believe in 2009. It's one of the earliest standalone releases, but it's also disc 5 of volume 1 of the archives. And it's live at Fillmore East, which is just this unreal Crazy Horse show from 1970, specifically March 6th and 7th are the shows that this disc is called from. At that point, he was doing what he became famous for, which is he would have an acoustic set followed by an electric set. Well, with the exception of Cinnamon Girl, this album captures 6 of the 7 songs that dominated the electric set. Yeah. And just really awesome stuff. And there's a couple of things to note. Producer Jack Nitzsche, who Young had a musical relationship dating back to Buffalo Springfield with, his on electric piano. And turns out Nitzsche was actually part of, briefly was a member of Crazy Horse and played on their first record, standalone record, which bombed. They did a record without Neil. And it bombed, and so Nitzsche ended up going his separate ways. But he plays electric piano on this record, and it adds a surprising amount of texture and groove, especially to Down by the River. It's just really, really strong. So a couple of notable things about this record. Danny Whitten, obviously, he was a star. He had a certain clever minimalism that, when combined with Young's rapid fire and just burning solos, just made for almost jazz-like quality to what they were doing. Like, it was almost a cross-cutting rhythm guitar that sort of set up the backbone for Neil's soloing. And so Whitten was a really, really talented guy, hell of a backup vocalist. The source version of Come On Baby, Let's Go Downtown from 1974's Tonight's the Night is on this record. It's a little bit longer here. It was cut down on that Tonight's the Night album for efficiency, but a hell of a song. Absolute, hell of a song. There's, the soloing on Down by the River and Cowgirl in the Sand is unimaginably great, even better than it is on the studio album, especially Down by the River. That's just Neil in rare form, in rarefied air, just following along with that. Also notable to point out that this 6-song set includes Winter Long, which really influential single for a lot of grunge and a lot of college rock bands in the 80s, including the Pixies. which was released as a single, was never part of an album, but it came out of what was about 1973, 74. I think it was straight.
It came out on the Beach in 1974. And by the way, Tonight's the Night was 75, not 1974.
Oh, okay, gotcha. But Winter Long, by the way, is not on the Beach. Maybe it comes from the same recording, but it's not on the Beach.
Oh, really?
Trust me. It was released on Decade. That was its formal release. That's where it first saw the light of day. Decade in, I believe, 77. But here we have an early version of Winterlong that's just absolutely rock balls out, and with that electric piano and with Danny Whitten on electric guitar or on rhythm guitar, it's just really, really fascinating stuff. And that's kind of like deep, dark, in the archives, Neil, that Winterlong was hovering at a show that early, way before the Stray Gators and Ben Keith got their hands on it. So, Arturo, thoughts about this live at Fillmore East record?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the version of "Come On Baby, Let's Go Downtown" that is awfully similar to the version on "Tonight's the Night." But yeah, you said it's the same. It's the same one.
It is the source recording for that album.
Yeah, this performance was recorded exactly 53 years ago, and it sounds like it was recorded yesterday. It just reminds you that recording technology back then wasn't quite as bad as people like to think nowadays.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, especially in rock and roll. I mean, then again, he also had some aces that were working for him, like David Briggs and folks like that were just like master engineers. So that kind of helps. It's just a really, really great show, and just a testament to the power of the early power of Crazy Horse. And it's kind of a sad, what could have been, where, how Crazy Horse would have developed with Danny Whitten as a co-songwriter and a real kind of spiritual compatriot with Young on the guitars. There's a little bit of mournfulness to be had there, which definitely translates into the next record on this list. This is from 1971, and it's called Royce Hall. And as the name suggests, it comes from a full show recording solo show that Neil Young did at Royce Hall on the campus of UCLA out there in Los Angeles. And, you hinted at this earlier, that his confidence grew by leaps and bounds. So that, this is January 30th, 1971. So in a little less than 2 years, he's really gotten a swagger and really kind of found his voice. And so the difference in confidence and banter between these records is really marked. And not only that, but also the rawness. Like, he's really going for it at this point. And so there's, the material is that much better. And so it allows him to be that much more expressive with his voice. This album, by the way, is part of what's known as the official bootleg series. And as that title connotes, this is stuff that's been out on the bootleg circuit for a long time. That Neil finally, cleaned up, re-engineered, remixed, and put out there officially. This is Neil's endorsed version of this record. And so a couple of things to say about this show. It's a little bit more. I mean, he's mixing instruments. He's got piano in there. He's got harmonica, but it's just him. And for the most part, it's a strong show. And the most notable thing about it is this is where the source recording for Needle and the Damage Done from Harvest is taken from. Right. And so obviously, because how could you possibly duplicate that performance elsewhere? It's just it's a singular version of the song, and it's got a really poignant intro before he starts into it. He says, quote, "This is a song I wrote about friends of mine, although I didn't know them." And which, now keep in mind, Danny Whitten didn't die for almost 2 years after this. But mostly he has Danny Whitten and several other people, but mostly Danny Whitten in mind when he's talking about the song and about a debilitating, what at that point had become a debilitating heroin addiction. by Witten. So there's that, and then it's also the source material or the source recording for Love in Mind from the sorely underrated record Time Fades Away, which Neil, it's a live record, but he released in 1973. So a few other notable things about the performances here. It includes versions of See the Sky About to Rain, which didn't see the light of day until On the Beach in 74. It also has a number of songs from Harvest, which didn't get a release for another year. And there's also a version of Journey Through the Past on here, which is I actually think is more resonant and more beautiful than the one that shows up on Time Fades Away. And then the highlight of this record, the absolute highlight of it, and it's one of the more joyous sections of any of these records, is a 9-minute run through Sugar Mountain. When again, he says, in the story, kind of similar to the Riverboat set, he professes not to like Sugar Mountain, says he wrote it on his 20th birthday, and he said had some sentiments that he doesn't agree with anymore and all that. So he's goofing on the song. But what he does is he manages to turn it into kind of almost like an Arlo Guthrie-ish type of let's build a sing-along as we go here. And so here, I'm going to do this, and then you're going to sing the chorus, and, oh, you have to do it louder next time and all that. And so he manages to turn Sugar Mountain, which is this lilting folk ballad, into like almost like an Alice's Restaurant type event by the end of it. And he's got people clapping their hands and singing loudly, and he's jokey and folksy all the way through. It's just kind of a magical feat. I mean, it's a confident performer that has an audience eating out of the palm of his hand. So great set, and it really it kind of sets the stage for the next few years, because now he's got this he's this confident performer. You start to see that he's got this well of material, because there's stuff on here that defines albums for the next 3 or 4 years that shows up on this record. And so it's marvelous. Arturo, your opinion?
Yeah, Young had a gift for making large venue shows seem as intimate as playing in front of 20 people in a coffee shop. And you definitely get that feeling here, as he's gracious enough to, to provide little details of his personal life as between song banter. And he does that here. And of course, like I said earlier, his between song banter gets better between 1969 and 1971. By the way, if you go on YouTube, you can find a video of an actual televised performance of Neil Young playing at the BBC studios from this very same tour. It's a short 30-minute video, so it's a truncated version of his usual set list, but it's worth checking out. I have it, actually. I own that video.
Yeah,
it's in my hard drive.
Yeah, I have to go seek that out. I mean, that's one blind spot I've had is that show. Although I know of it, and I know of its legend. I'm surprised he actually hasn't put that out in the archives yet. And who knows, that's coming, because supposedly there's a volume 3 that's coming sometime in the next couple of years. So
it's supposed to come out like next year, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like next year or 25. He's been promising volume 3 for a while. I assume that it'll probably be like 76 to the present. That he'll kind of pour out the coffers there. So he does this show in 71, as history would have it. By then, he's on the rise with Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Young with Deja Vu. He's released after the Gold Rush, which is released to critical acclaim. And a year later, he is releasing Harvest, which blows up into a bestseller and puts him on the charts. He gets hits, Heart of Gold and Old Man out of that album. And it's regarded as a classic. I personally put it on only 4 stars. I think there's a couple of duds on it, but I'm in the minority on that one with Harvest. But what it does is now it propels him into being a headliner. So instead of theaters like Royce Hall, he's now being able to play arenas and like big theaters and arenas. And so he's becoming a headliner. But all through it, he's miserable. He's losing several friends to heroin addiction. His marriage to actress Carrie Snodgrass is starting to have strain. And he's starting to have some problems with a couple of his bandmates, most especially Jack Nietzsche, who legend has it had an affair with Carrie Snodgrass. And he was so not fond of this late 72, early 73 tour that the great testament to it, or the great monument to it, Time Fades Away, stayed out of print for like more than 30 years, which when you consider it is really insane. It's the same thing with On the Beach, that Neil doesn't like to relive bad old times. And so he prevented this from coming back out, or Time Fades Away back out. That so to follow up, I mean, it's real ballsy to follow up an album as clean and as gorgeous and as sing-songy as Harvest with something like Time Fades Away, which is about as nihilistic as it gets, and just sort of is all over the place, but just has even the softer stuff has a real kind of anarchic energy to it.
Yeah.
And so during this period comes our next album from the archives, which was just released in the last couple of years. This is a show. It's from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, home of the Crimson Tide. February 5th, 1973. At one point, Young referred to this recording as Time Fades Away 2. Yeah. Just saying that it's another testament, or sort of recording, or sort of totem to this tour. And this album and this tour features what I think is his best band. I think his best backing band, which was the Stray Gators, which for this tour included Ben Keith, who was his main sideman for his country-ish albums for years and decades. He played lap steel guitar, slide guitar, dobro, and other instruments of that sort. You had Tim Drummond on bass, Nietzsche was on piano, and Kenny Buttrey was on drums. And so the album starts off with two really good solo performances. You have a lovely rendering of Here We Are in the Years, which is a song from his debut self-titled record, and a faithful rendition of After the Gold Rush, which is the title track from one of the greatest albums of all time, After the Gold Rush. And then he brings out the Stray Gators, and they do a run through several, like 4 Harvest songs. And the amusing thing here is just how bored Young sounds when you compare his vocal performances from this show, later on in the set. Like before and after, he sounds way more engaged and way more into it than these. He sounds like he's airmailing it in. And I think that, part of what gives away his mindset is when he introduces Heart of Gold, he tells a story which he says is half true, which probably means is not true. But he says that they were approached about doing Heart of Gold as a 60-minute commercial that would be syndicated on radio called Burger of Gold, which is very funny. But it doesn't matter. The stuff is still fantastic. I mean, it's just, Out on the Weekend is about as good as you would imagine. Alabama is pretty rocked out and has a really nice little piano solo from Jack Nietzsche. And then the second half of the record is where he really gets into, okay, that's the stuff I have to play. Now here's the stuff I want to play. And you get early versions of Lookout Joe and New Mama from Tonight's the Night. New Mama here really gets, it's bashed out on the Tonight's the Night record. It's an acoustic guitar with like 5 or 6 part harmony, which is just gorgeous, and it's just this lilting, gorgeous little ballad. Here, it's just bashed out. I mean, they even he announces it as a brand new song, and so they're still kind of exploring it, but it's really kind of just bashed out and messy, which is kind of cool. And then Lookout Joe has more of a nihilistic and faster edge to it than it does in the studio version. And then he has versions of Time Fades Away and Don't Be Denied, which are the 2 best songs from Time Fades Away, that here get more, they're more searing. They're a little bit, it's weird. Time Fades Away is faster and Don't Be Denied is slower, but they both get more fire and more magic.
I much prefer the version of Don't Be Denied on the album, the live album, Time Fades Away.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, well, it's tighter. I mean,
Yeah.
it's less repetitive, but there's a slow burn to it that is a little bit surprising. It's more menacing, I think, here. It's not better, but it is more menacing. But I kind of like the version of Time Fades Away here, uh, because Ben Keith is kind of out of his mind, maybe literally, with some of the lap steel stuff
Yeah.
that he's doing here. So again, this is another one of those like snapshots in time of this band on this tour playing these mind blowing shows. What say you about Tuscaloosa, Arturo?
Yeah, there are 11 tracks on this live release. And at the time of its recording, 1973, five of the 11 tracks were unreleased or unrecorded at the time.
Yep.
It's fascinating how Young, no matter how popular he got, was always all too willing to play songs no one, or at least no casual fans, had ever heard before.
Yeah.
He was always like this, and he kind of still is.
Yeah. I was like, you never know what he's going to whip out at any given moment. Like he'll have works in progress mixed in there with the established hits. And then again, there's the stuff he has to play versus the stuff he wants to play, which
Right.
was definitely at work during this Time Fades Away tour. And
Right.
when he came into Tuscaloosa, and again, you can tell it's almost worth listening for that, because it's these wonderfully orthodox performances, live performances of the stuff from Harvest. Great
Yeah.
version of Old Man. Really great steel guitar playing on that from Ben Keith. Out on the Weekend is fantastic. Harvest itself is really nice. But then again, it turns into Time Fades Away, and it's like bash, 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 and it's okay. Now it's time to break the rules, motherfuckers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so and that's kind of a theme that runs through it. So moving on, so here over the next couple of years, there's a couple of performances, by the way, that should be mentioned. He's got one of those official bootlegs is called Carnegie Hall. That's a Carnegie Hall show from '74. It was during this period that he started to really kind of spread his wings and as Arturo just alluded to, get more adventurous with what he was doing and what he was introducing and what he was mingling in there. And he goes through that cycle. He starts to pull out of it in 76 or 75, 76 when he releases Zuma, which is his follow-up to Tonight's the Night, where it's like he's got his swagger back. So he's out of the ditch. He's sobered up a little bit, and he's back to being a dominant, almost like Godzilla-like figure in his shows. And in '76, you really start to get the height. This is Young at his absolute height as a performer, as an icon, as a myth maker, in terms of how he's performing and what he's pulling off on stage. And the next record, I think, is just stunning in some of its revelations. This is called Odeon Budokan. And as that name suggests, half of the stuff is taken from a show at the Hammersmith Odeon in London. And half of the stuff is taken from the Budokan venue in Japan, made famous most especially by Cheap Trick, of all bands. And both of these shows were recorded in March of 1976, and it's structured the way a lot of Neil shows are. The acoustic set is taken from London, and the electric side, or mostly electric side, is taken from Budokan. And so what you have here, again, he's just reached a confidence, and he's just reached a glory in his performance. There's an amazing version of After the Gold Rush here. And again, this is probably, I think, like the second or third After the Gold Rush that's appeared on this list so far. But this one is amazing, and it's worth a listen to this record just for this performance alone. He sings it in a lower, more resonant register, so it's not the freaky falsetto or the whiny, the high whiny. It adds real gravitas and mystery to the lyrics. And there's a lovely harmonica solo in place of the trumpet from the studio version. And so it's just this achingly gorgeous, really committed performance of it. And one of the things, and this shows up, in this, he did this in the Tuscaloosa performance of After the Gold Rush, but here it really stands out because of its phrasing. He changes one of the lyrics to "We got Mother Nature on the run in the 1970s,"
Yeah.
as opposed to "Look at Mother Nature on the run."
Right.
And it really stands out, and it really kind of hits me right in the nuts when I hear it. And then he also has another amazing acoustic performance of a song, and we'll talk a little bit more about it here in a bit, called String Man, and which I personally think is the best of his songs. It's between that and Winter Long as a song that never got a formal studio album release. It's the best song, I think, that never made it to a formal record. And just a really just gorgeous ballad, just piano ballad. And see, the funny part is that it shows up here and on an unreleased studio record that we'll talk about, and also on MTV Unplugged 17 years later, the 1993 MTV Unplugged record. And it's just he doesn't get cute in any of the versions. It's just him and a piano.
Yeah.
And it's just really it's an elegy for a guy that is really struggling and going through the motions. And there's a wonderful lyric on the song, quote, "You can say the soul is gone and close another door. Just be sure that yours is not the one." Just really, really powerful stuff. And then on the electric side, the amazing thing about it is the economy of it. I mean, it's almost shocking. He's got a 7-minute long version of Cortez the Killer and a 5-minute long version of Cowgirl in the Sand.
Truncated versions.
Yeah, and it truncated, but naturally, it's not, okay, we're truncating it. It's not a melody, it's not a medley. It's not like here you were making a ditty out of it. He bashes them the fuck out.
Right.
And he really gets, like Cortez, only 7 minutes long, including the 40-second fuzz and bang outro. Right. And so he's just really, and the solo is just as incendiary as it is on the studio album. Cowgirl in the Sand has just really great, kind of Zuma style. At that point, he was starting to come up with a really singular style using Old Black, his 1953 Gibson Les Paul, and really comes out and just really, really strong, really powerful. And so, yes, the version of Cowgirl in the Sand on Live at Fillmore East is better because it's the 16.5-minute version with Danny Whitten, and it just gets to unbelievable heights. But here it's almost more impressive because you get the same kind of burn and churn in 5 minutes. And so there's an economy to that's really, really impressive. So, Arturo, what's your thought about Young in 76 and about what you hear on Odeon Budokan?
Yeah, as good as this is, I really wish Neil would release the whole show from the Hammersmith Odeon in London and the whole show from the Budokan in Tokyo. When I listen to a live album, I like to hear a complete show, which is why I often defer to well-recorded bootlegs, a la Fish or the Grateful Dead. That being said, the version here of The Old Laughing Lady is a much more powerful song, and the lyrics really resonate more when it's stripped of its orchestral arrangement and stripped down to just a voice and acoustic guitar. Like you alluded to, the vocals and the piano ballad on the piano ballad String Man are actually more affecting and just better than the studio version from the Chrome Dream sessions. Like I said, I love this set. I just want to hear the whole shows, not just get to this piece and Frankenstein them together. I'm not into that.
That's a good point. It should be mentioned that as far as I know, Tuscaloosa and Live at Fillmore East, those aren't complete shows either. Like Live at Fillmore East is culled from 2 different shows, and obviously Tuscaloosa is 11 songs from a larger set that Neil played that night. And so a lot of this, again, this is sort of like Neil shaping, and that's a good excuse to bring this up as a reminder. This is Neil curating his own narrative,
right?
And sort of releasing things the way that he wants them to, and just sort of here's the strongest thing that I can release. And like you said, the Frankenstein approach with Odeon Budokan. Although I don't know. I mean, I guess you could do Odeon Budokan as a box set, right? Like discs 1 and 2 Odeon and discs 3 and 4 Budokan.
Yeah.
Or it's like Odeon.
Budokan. Well, the Odeon Hammersmith, the Odeon London shows, I mean, that was like a 2 or 3 night residency.
Yeah.
So you can make just a whole, set based on a box set based on those shows.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's, the part of the archives is Neil's attempt to, lasso a million termites.
Yeah.
And let's find the termites out of the million of them that make the most sense. So that's kind of the exercise there.
On this episode, we gave you our picks for the best of Neil Young's archive series. For the next episode, we're going to explore the brief career of one of the most fascinating and, frankly, tragic rock band stories of the 1990s, Blind Melon. Exactly 30 years ago, yours truly Curmudgeons befriended each other as freshman students at Syracuse University, and among the many bands we bonded over, one of them was Blind Melon and their self-titled debut album, which Chris in particular was extremely enthusiastic about. A year after that album came out, it exploded in popularity thanks to the huge success of the single No Rain. Blind Melon had an underratedly original sound that seemed to split the difference between the neo-hippie jam band movement that was starting to catch fire at the time and soulful southern rock. They would put out just one more album before lead singer and musical guiding force Shannon Hoon died of a drug overdose in 1995. We're going to explore their all-too-brief career and analyze their classic debut album track by track in our next episode as the Curmudgeon Rock Report brings you Blind Melon is the best CD I have. Yes, folks, those were the exact words Chris uttered on one fall night in 1993. All right, so now we're gone from one part of these 10 recommendations that are mostly live. Now we're going to segue into the mostly studio or previously unreleased studio stuff. Chris.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So part of the archives, it's not all live stuff. It's unreleased studio stuff. And not only that, but like some of the stuff in the archives box sets are actually like the performances or from the recordings that were used on the album. And they're just sort of slightly different versions, but you also get B-sides and unreleased singles and all that. But within that, and as we said earlier, Neil had this penchant for making albums and then shelving them. Yeah. And you sort of making the choice to stand down. Well, he had two famous, and we're going to cover them both here at number 6. He had two really storied ones that grew into proportion of myth and were the subject of bootlegs for a long time, and incomplete bootlegs, by the way. It was never the full thing. And so he had two albums that he actually had prepped. One of them he was intending to release and had an official tape made of it called Homegrown. And that was in 1974. And then the second album he made as an acetate, and I think more to just sort of capture what he was doing, as opposed to, he made the acetate and he had given it to his producer, Dave. It was being distributed, but almost kind of like hey, here's what I have going on now. Not clear if he ever intended to release it as an album, but that was called Chrome Dreams. Right. And so Homegrown and Chrome Dreams, and these are the two mythical studio releases as part of this archives. And just in the last several years, he's released both, supposedly as intended to be released back then. And they're both magnificent. And so we'll do one at a time. Homegrown. So this is from 1974. And the story that I've read that, in interviews that Young tells is that he was having a party at his house and he had some friends over and he had a tape from the studio. One side of it was Homegrown and he played that for his friends. And so, okay, we'll do that. Now the party gets a little older and people are drunker and higher. And so, oh yeah, the other side of the tape has got Tonight's the Night on it. Or the stuff from the Tonight's the Night sessions. And so he turns that over and everybody's like, whoa. And then they basically dared him to release that instead of Homegrown. And they said, oh, okay, well, that's more, seems more interesting. And so on that dare, he put out Tonight's the Night, and he shelved Homegrown,
which is, I think, his very best album ever. I'm a Tonight's the Night fan.
Oh yeah, I'm a huge fan of it as well.
I think it's his best record. I think it's maybe one of the 100 best albums ever made. That's just my opinion.
It's up there. It's definitely it has an argument for top 100 for sure. And it's one of my 3 or 4 favorite Neil records. It was the one that drew me to Neil and made me such a fanatical Neil fan in the first place. And so to talk about Homegrown a little bit, I kind of think that he, for about 3 years, I guess his brush with fame after Harvest was so alienating that he kind of did, oh, that's the anti-commercial route. Oh, let's take that one. Mm-hmm. And so I think that if he had put out Homegrown there in 74 or 75, that could have kept him more commercially viable. And, he's had a couple of comebacks since then, but he could have like turned back on the juice, because there's some really commercial stuff on Homegrown. It's kind of, it's sort of in the vein of Harvest in the sense that it's very country and folk influenced and very acoustic influenced. It's got some familiar songs that did see the light of day. Love is a Rose, which became a hit for Linda Ronstadt, is on the Decade double album set from 77. Star of Bethlehem, which is a gorgeous ballad that he co-sang with Emmylou Harris. That found release on American Stars and Bars, as did a couple of other songs from this record. The opening 2 songs are Separate Ways and Try, both of which had huge commercial potential, especially Try, because Try is essentially 4/4 waltz time and is quite lovely. And there's also guest turns on this album from Levon Helm on drums. I think he actually shows up on Try. And then Robbie Robertson is on guitar for White Line, which, showing, kind of what, one of the aggravating things about Neil, his penchant for sitting on some of his best stuff. White Line didn't get a formal release until 1990. Yeah. When Ragged Glory came out. Right. So it's a little freaky to hear that, and to hear the early version. It's a pretty version too. And then a couple of other highlights. There's a version of Homegrown on here. Now, Homegrown found its release on American Stars and Bars. American Stars and Bars essentially is like an odds and sods from songs that were intended for other releases.
It's still a great album though.
Yeah, it's a great album because the stuff on it was so good, and it's almost like what could have been. Homegrown and Chrome Dreams are both better than American Stars and Bars. It really is. But Homegrown here, the version that made it to American Stars and Bars is a Crazy Horse, pounding it out, and obviously it's an ode to weed. It's just a blatant song about loving weed. But here it's much more countrified. It's got Ben Keith on it and a more Stray Gators feel to it. It's a different flavor, but it's still really cool, and it still kind of rocks. Not quite as much as the Crazy Horse version, and it doesn't have like Neil soloing on Old Black, but it's still pretty damn good. And then there's another highlight on here. It's a little rocker named Vacancy, which has a real angry edge to it, and it's really Stray Gators backing at its finest. Definitely worth checking out for that. So it's just a real combination of countryish, country rock classics, like acoustic balladry, and then a couple of near rockers. Would have been a really, really strong record, and I think probably would have been a commercial hit with 1 or 2 singles. I think Star of Bethlehem might have been a top 10 hit if he had released it.
Gorgeous song.
Yeah, because 74, that's close enough in time to Harvest that it would have still been relevant. And Love is a Rose actually became a modest hit for Linda Ronstadt. So one of those 2 songs probably would have been a top 10 hit for him. So, he still had it. So any thoughts about Homegrown?
Yeah, you listen to this shit and you ask yourself, why in the fucking world would he put these songs on the shelf? Listening to this compilation pisses me off, and not because it sucks, but the exact opposite. I mean, these are some of the best songs of the man's career. Most of them, the highlights of albums that they would eventually appear on, both in studio and live forms. Nothing against American Stars and Bars, which I love, but with the exception of Will to Love, which is perfect on the beach, This should have been his 1977 album.
Yeah,
Combining the best of Homegrown and Chrome Dreams. Boom. Take out Will to Love, because Will to Love is just fine on the beach. The rest of it, boom. Make that your 1977 record. Especially Pocahontas and all acoustic. Powderfinger and all acoustic Powderfinger. How about that?
Hey, I get to be your fact checking cuz now. Will to Love is on American Stars and Bars, not on the beach.
Oh, which is the one that's on the beach? There's a song here, a version here that is on. Is it on? Am I getting my
no? There's no songs here that are on the beach.
Okay, never. Okay, my mistake.
Yeah, I was going to say. So your homework assignment is to listen on the beach. Yeah, clearly.
My mistake.
No problem. That's why I'm the Neil Young-ologist and you're not.
Right. So okay, yes. So
Will to Love is
Will to Love is on American Stars and Bars. Okay.
Yeah,
right.
and so let me back up then, and so now you've started to cross over into the second record, which is Chrome Dreams.
Right.
And Chrome Dreams is absolutely fascinating because what this does is it's the electric stuff. It's Homegrown and Like a Hurricane, right? And again, Star of Bethlehem. I guess it wasn't going to make Homegrown, but it was going to make Chrome Dreams. Didn't make either, but it ended up on American Stars and Bars. So the kind of that stuff from American Stars and Bars, and then you get studio acoustic versions of Pocahontas, which it should be noted that the version of Pocahontas that shows up on Chrome Dreams is actually the same recording featured on Rust Never Sleeps. Just the one on the one on Rust Never Sleeps just has overdubs. It overdubs on keyboard effects and backing vocals and real and drum actually. So, but the vocal and the acoustic guitar come from this version of Pocahontas. There's also a version of Sedan Delivery, which is electric and rocked out, just not nearly as gnarly and not nearly as nihilistic as it showed up on Rust Never Sleeps. The acoustic version of Powderfinger, unsurprisingly, is just beautiful. I mean, that's a song, no matter how he played it. He could have played that on pump organ and it would still been beautiful.
Right.
And it just a perfect song. String Man shows up on here, the studio version of that, which again I think was probably his best unreleased or formerly unreleased non-studio album song. And then just a cross section of other stuff, Will to Love, and so kind of take those things, and then there's also I think the real curveball that shows up on Chrome Dreams is a version of Too Far Gone, which Too Far Gone, it became a staple of some of his shows in the 70s, and or some of his sets, especially in the mid 70s. But here it's him on acoustic guitar and Frankie San Pedro, Pancho, his replacement guitarist in Crazy Horse, on mandolin. Doing the song. Now, it doesn't see the light of day. That song didn't get to an album until 1989's Freedom. And of course, on Freedom, it rocks balls. It really does. But here, it's definitely a country ballad. And so that's the real curveball here. So you get these things, and it's just extraordinary. And as an archival achievement, as a curatorial achievement, it's hard to believe that he had all these recordings on one acetate, because had he released it, it would have been his best record. Or it would have been it would have been one of his it would have been
it
would have been like one of his top 5
classic.
Records. It would have been an absolute classic. And granted, I mean, there's a part of me that's thankful that he held off on the Rust Never Sleep stuff, because the versions of those songs are just marvelous. And so to introduce him to the world that way, I think was a much better treatment than they would have gotten here, which is a funny thing to say because they're incredible here. So there you go. Homegrown and Chrome Dreams. It's worth a mention again. Arturo alluded to it. All of this is on Neil Young's official YouTube channel. His entire catalog, everything he's released, is available through his Neil Young channel for free on YouTube. This is why, him not being on Spotify or distributing on X is not that big of a deal, because it's all out there.
Right.
And so extraordinary. So let's just say you have no life and no girlfriend, and you just don't want to leave the house for 4 days. Go on YouTube and listen to all this shit.
Yeah, definitely.
but we're doing some of the work, so you don't have to work quite as hard. So that's a public service. And so we move on from those studio nuggets and sort of what could have been great albums back into his growth as a performer on the road. So around 1977, he's starting to segue. He's starting to get a Country Jones again, hearkening back to Harvest and Homegrown. And so in the summer of 77, he's living in Santa Cruz, or he had moved to Santa Cruz. And he's got a few buddies in the area, including two guys from the band Moby Grape and a couple of local musicians, a singer-songwriter named Jeff Blackburn and a drummer named Johnny Craviotto. And they essentially, those four guys were just like local dudes that were like bar band guys that like they had their own songs, and the very sort of country is very Byrds influenced and very outlaw country influenced. And, Neil is becoming friends with these guys. And I guess Blackburn calls up Neil one day and says, "Hey, Neil, you want to come play a bunch of shows with us around the Santa Cruz area?" And Neil's like, "Oh, yeah, sure." Because, Neil's working on his new stuff, and, he's, it's just kind of a fun thing. Now, they couldn't, for contractual reasons, as I understand it, they couldn't tour outside of Santa Cruz because of obligations. Crazy Horse basically was his only touring band. And that was something that I think the label was enforcing and his concert promoters were enforcing at the time. So for 3 months in the summer of 77, he did the Ducks. That's what they were known as, the Ducks. And this was Neil and his buddies, Jeff Blackburn and Bob Mosley and Johnny Craviotto. They did a bunch of gigging at bars and clubs, including the Catalyst, which is a 1,000-seat venue in Santa Cruz. And so this is a compilation from those shows. This is called High Flying, and it's another release from the official bootleg series. And High Flying, it's a couple of discs. It's pretty long, but it's a lot of fun. All four guys contributing songs, and Neil bringing out Old Black, the 53 Gibson Les Paul that is all over. Everybody knows this is Nowhere and Zuma and those. Yeah. And so basically it's Neil Young as the lead guitarist in your bar band and just absolutely rip roaring, just bashing the fuck out and just going to town as a soloist. And so a lot of fun listening to that. And not only that, but it ends up being a laboratory for some of his own stuff. Little Wing, which is another one of those unreleased studio record, songs that never made it to a studio album. No, it's not Hendrix's Little Wing. He had his own song called Little Wing. There's a cover of that here. There's really fun covers of Human Highway, or versions of Human Highway and Sail Away. Human Highway is about as cheesy as it gets from Comes a Time. In terms of how it's done there, it's this real like hokey ditty, but here it's just straightforward country rock, almost like Flying Burrito Brothers style. And same thing with Sail Away, which gets the real sort of pop, lovely treatment, duet with Nicolette Larson treatment in the studio, and that showed up on Rust Never Sleeps. Here again, it's just a straightforward little country rocker with soloing from Neil and just like a real edge to it. There's also a really kick-ass version of Are You Ready for the Country from Harvest on here, where it's just him bashing out. Right. And then the highlight in terms of the Neil stuff is these guys doing the most reverent cover imaginable of Mr. Soul, where it outdoes. It's basically the same arrangement as the Buffalo Springfield version from 66 or 67. And they just take it to new heights. And it's just Neil. You can tell he's having a blast. That here he is. Oh, I get to pretend like I'm in just some random band called the Ducks, and I'm bringing out one of the great rock songs ever made, and just absolutely just destroying. I'm playing Godzilla on stage for like 70 people, and so really, I wouldn't say it's not the best of these things, but it's a fun chapter for Neil, where he's gigging around for a couple months, and. The story there is that he eventually left the band and went back and doing his own thing. The other guys tried to carry on as their own band, but quickly petered out. And so we're left with this testament of when Neil joined a bar band in Santa Cruz. Art, any thoughts?
Yeah, this is really a fun collection. I like it. If aliens came down to visit Earth and asked what country-tinged rock and roll from California in the 1970s sounds like, you would play them this. Or better yet, you'd play them this as the mid-level roadside diner version. You would play them the Eagles for the gourmet version.
Well, yeah. Or the Flying Burrito Brothers. Yeah.
Right. It's interesting how much of this actually sounds, a lot of it actually sounds like later period Moby Grape when they went full throttle into country rock. Gee, I wonder why. Bob Mosley's in the band.
Yep. Yeah. And it turns out another guy from Moby Grape, the lead singer of Moby Grape, was a friend of Neil's as well. I don't think he ends up on any of these songs, but Moby Grape was instrumental in playing some of this stuff. So yeah, it's no coincidence that late period Moby Grape sounds a whole lot like the Ducks and vice versa. So really, really great stuff. So now we're going to summarize the next 13 years or 12 years in between records, in between entries on this list, between numbers 8 and 9 this way. So, obviously he had his triumph with Rust Never Sleeps in the recordings from 1978. But then he had his 80s slump where he was trying on new suits. And granted, he was raising a kid that was severely stricken with cerebral palsy. So maybe it's understandable that,
like many people of his era in the 1980s, Paul McCartney, Joni Mitchell, just everybody, they all suffered from 80s-itis.
Yeah, they all suffered from 80s-itis. How to stay relevant. And in Neil's case, his idea of staying relevant was to not stay relevant. Yeah. If it wasn't for Farm Aid, Neil would have had a terrible 80s.
Freedom's a good album. That came out in 1989.
Yeah, 89. He ended it strong, but before then, it's like, let's have the techno record. Oh, let's have the rockabilly record. Oh, let's have the jazz record. And it was really, really tacky. There are a couple of albums worth a mention that from this archive series. That he's got one performance from 1984 with his country band, the International Harvesters, that is available. It's forgettable. You can avoid it. It's him, basically him doing cowpoke stereotypical country. It's almost insulting. If I'm a real country artist, I'm kind of insulted by it. And then the Blue Notes, which was his jazz band that he toured with in 1988 to support This Note's for You. Yeah. And again, some of those songs on This Note's for You are pretty good. The jazz treatment, yuck.
It's badly produced.
Badly produced.
Yeah, bad 1980s reverb heavy production of jazz rock. It's like, what the fuck?
Yeah. Which is kind of funny because that bad reverb production serves Freedom the next year really well. It's the same producer, but it's the material and also
the material's better. Yeah.
And Neil's inspired guitar playing on the guitar noise. That was his return to guitar noise. But anyway, so those are a couple of testaments from that period. Forgettable. You can kind of skip over that. Well, he starts to get reborn in 1989 with Freedom, where apparently the election of George Bush gets him really focused on social issues, and he comes up with Rockin' in the Free World and Crime in the City and some of those great songs. He also fell back in love with the mythic Old West with El Dorado and some of that stuff as well. Well, the next year is when he was fully back, and he got inspired, and he got Crazy Horse together at his ranch in California, and they bashed out Ragged Glory, which is one of the best albums of the 1990s by anybody. And just wonderful songwriting, wonderful playing, and just loud. It is a loud record, and it's one of the more marvelously loud records you'll ever hear. Well, at the end of 1990, Neil and Crazy Horse are preparing to go on a world tour, where they're going to play arenas in the U.S. and in Europe and other points. And so as a rehearsal show,
Yeah.
as a warm-up show on November 13th, 1990. They play the Catalyst in Santa Cruz, and the Catalyst, again, it's about 1,000-seat venue.
About 800 to 1,000. It's like a big nightclub.
It's like a big nightclub. It's like testament to like the Knitting Factory or something like, or actually, well, Irving Plaza.
It's kind of like that.
About that size in New York City for the folks that have that reference, or like some of the, whatever the big clubs in Philly and DC are, like the Metro in DC. It's kind of like that. But anyway, so here they are for the warm-up show. And this is documented on an album called Way Down in the Rust Bucket, which just came out 2 years ago. And you want to talk about bashing the fuck out.
Yeah.
And this is Neil Neil's never been greater. You want to hear Neil as a lead guitarist and as a soloist, get Way Down in the Rust Bucket, and that's all you'll ever need. Because it's like one marvelous solo after another. He is just on. I mean, kick-ass version of Danger Bird, which was, goes back to Zuma. Obviously, killer version of Cortez the Killer. The album opens with Country Home, which is the opener for Ragged Glory, and he's killer there. Fucking Up is great. Even the soloing on Homegrown, which is like the hokiest song in the world, but the soloing on that is unbelievable. It's jaw-dropping.
Right.
And so everything on that album just works. It's Neil at the absolute height of his powers. They did 3 sets that night. It's a long ass show. It ends with 3 13-minute long workouts at the end. And so they saved the longest for last. And, talk about your encore. And so remember, this is the rehearsal show in advance of the tour that birthed Weld and Arc, which, there's more enthusiasm for those shows by other Neil heads, or for those records. I'm not a huge Weld fan, with the exception of the version of Crime on the City on that.
Yeah.
And then Arc is just shit.
Yeah.
It basically, it's like, like Neil, Lou Reed can do Metal Machine music. Hold my beer.
Yeah.
Is essentially what's going on there. But again, so this is supposed to be the rehearsal show, and he's like on, like, like the most on that you can imagine him being. And so I think of all of the records that I've done here, of all 10 that I'm covering, or 11, this is the most essential of the live recordings, I think, for folks.
Probably.
Just to hear, because like Neil would just have those days where he could just roll out of bed and just everything he did was just jaw-dropping. Right. And this is an example of it. I'm assuming you agree, Arturo.
Yeah, this is one of my favorites of the whole archival concert series. However, I do have a bone to pick with this one.
How come?
The word I come up with to describe this show is epic, at well over 2 hours. I wonder if the shows he did on his Weld tour from 1991 were
they're famously long.
Yeah. However, when Neil released this in 2021, apparently there was an accompanying DVD that included one extra song that the audio version doesn't have.
Oh, yeah, Cowgirl.
A lengthy version of Cowgirl in the Sand. I hate it when live recordings are not complete. I've said this before. It also begs the question, why is Neil Young or anyone releasing DVDs in the year 2021?
Yeah.
Shouldn't this have gone straight to a streaming service?
Yeah.
If I were subscribed to Netflix or Disney Plus, I'd watch this,
Yeah. I mean, obviously. And that's the thing. And there is video from the show, like Homegrown on YouTube. It's not just the music. It's a video of them playing it. And it's actually the live record. It's just, just filmed. Not the soundboard version, but a filmed, like in the arena or in the theater version of Homegrown. From what I understand and from what I've read about that version of Cowgirl in the Sand that got left off, they had an issue with the soundboard.
Yeah.
And so it kind of got chopped off, but they did get it on video. And so the idea is that they didn't want to compromise it. And so they left it off of the audio album. But man, I'm telling you, it's just Young is a superhero, and this and maybe Odeon Budokan prove it the most out of these. The guy's an absolute superhero. So Moving on. So Neil in the 90s had a renaissance phase that guys our age,
Yeah.
thanks to bands like Pearl Jam, were kind of the gateway drug to find, Neil Young and the Who and the Wipers and the Meat Puppets and other bands like that. So he has a little bit of a renaissance, which ironically enough, he starts to get the Godfather of Grunge tag in 91. Well, he comes out with his most commercially successful record since Harvest with Harvest Moon, which again was another very commercially sound country rock record that had a couple of big hits and a big wedding favorite in Harvest Moon, which I never understand because it's about it's a song about trying to resurrect a long-term relationship as opposed to a new relationship. Like when people pick wedding songs, they really ought to listen to the lyrics,
like the Police, Every Breath You Take, which is about being a stalker.
Or A Band of Horses, No One's Gonna Love You, which is very ambiguous. It may actually be about a divorce rather than a marriage. But anyway, that was a digression. So he comes up with Harvest Moon, and then he segues into Sleeps with Angels. He does which is a marvelous record, includes a tribute to Kurt Cobain called Sleeps with Angels, but it kind of, I think, like for a lot of people, Cobain's death scared the shit out of Young, and he comes up with the best album he did in 15 years. At that point, just really great stuff. And then from there, he actually got together with Pearl Jam for an album and a tour the next year. The album was called Mirror Ball. Great stuff. But then from there, it started to wane a little bit. He's got Broken Arrow, which has some great stuff on it and some not so great stuff on it. Is very, very uneven. He takes 4 years off and he releases an album called Silver and Gold, which is mostly unreleased, stuff that was in his songbook.
And I think it's his last great album.
And it's a very, very good album. I wouldn't say his last good one. We'll get to that here in a bit. But he has a good streak going. And then it ends. And it ended kind of unceremoniously in 2001 when he released the album. It's an album called Are You Passionate? And he recorded this with Booker T and the MGs. Now, you would think that'd be really exciting. Oh, Neil, Booker T and Neil and Steve Cropper. Ooh, or with Booker T on organ. Ooh, nope. What a piece of shit. With the exception of the song Let's Roll, which is about the 9/11 Flight 93 tragedy.
Right.
Other than that, the rest of it is a real yawn fest and real just hokey and cheesy. Well, it turns out Are You Passionate was not the originally intended release. Big shock, huh? And so this is another instance, kind of like those studio albums we talked about, where the much better studio album that he recorded before Are You Passionate, called Toast, was put on the shelf. Now, again, this is kind of like in the vein of Time Fades Away, going away out of print for 30 years. He was having some issues with his second wife, Peggy, at the time, and half the songs are about his desperation about trying to resolve that, or it's lamentations about what they've lost and desperation to try to get it back. Well, it turns out Neil was like, well, that's kind of a bum trip of an album. I don't want to put that out. It's a little too personal, a little too, touches a little too close to home, literally. So he decided to put, that on the mothballs and do Are You Passionate? Although several of the songs in different form did show up on Are You Passionate? Needless to say, they're the couple of best songs on that record, that piece of shit. But Toast is a really, really strong album. It's a Crazy Horse record, but it's the Crazy Horse guys at their most understated. It's basically they're there to just supply a surprisingly quiet bed of just plain old rhythm stuff for Neil to just do his swinging, almost like low lurking. It was almost like a slow killer lurking guitar bit that he's doing throughout these songs, and just really great twisting, emotional solos, especially on album opener Quit. Just really gently swaying, and then the album closer is Boom Boom Boom, which shows up on Are You Passionate as She's a Healer. There, it's an awkward 9-minute rumble with Booker T and the MGs. Here, it's just textbook Crazy Horse. It's 13 minutes long. It's menacing, it's boiling in intensity. But again, Crazy Horse seems to barely be there. they're just content to let Young soloing be the star rather than the sludge. And then there's also a really great song on there called "Standing in the Light of Love," which is kind of in that vein of Over and Over from Ragged Glory and Crime in the City, the live version of it from Weld. It just has that just bash out quality to it, and it just has speedy desperation to it. So I was really impressed with this record. Surprised. I thought it would be also a piece of crap, but he could have kept it going. He could have kept, whatever momentum he had gotten from the 90s going, but he basically he shot himself in the foot. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. I mean, listen, somewhere along the line, someone forgot to remind Neil Young that breakup albums are usually among an artist's best work, if not their best work. Bob Dylan's Blood on the Tracks, Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, Marvin Gaye's Here My Dear, Blur's 13, Beck's Sea Change, Lucinda Williams' West. It's actually a pretty proud tradition in popular music. Now, while this album, Toast, is nowhere near as good as any of those, you're right. It's much better than the ill-advised old school R&B schlockfest that was the album that came out of its place. 2002, not 2001. 2002's Are You Passionate?
Yeah, Let's Roll went out as a single towards the end of the year. That's why I confused the years, because they rush released Let's Roll because of the news.
Yeah, the 9/11 thing, right?
Yeah.
Nevertheless, even with Toast, you can hear the beginning of Young's decline into bland, repetitive recycling of himself. Some of his guitar work here is beautiful and quite lyrical, but the songwriting, no matter how personal it is and how it documents the coming end of his marriage, which wouldn't happen until 2014 is when they formally divorced. Yet the songwriting, in my opinion, just doesn't really land and often feels a little too trite and sentimental rather than emotional. That's what I'm left with this album. Really great guitar playing. He really puts his heart in there. But like I said,
you're right.
Like I said, Crazy Horse sounds too distant. They sound like they're way too much in the background, and it's just a little too sentimental music. Songwriting wise.
You're right. I mean, that's what prevents it. I mean, it's 4 stars at best, probably more objectively more between 3 and 3.5. Because of some of that triteness in the middle. There's a couple of throwaways in there, but again, it's worth it for the soloing, because Neil is in rare form as a soloist on he hadn't soloed like that on a record probably since Ragged Glory. You could say that, where it's this sort of solo dominant performance. So oh well, like I said, it's just indicative of Neil's magic ability to shoot himself in the foot when it comes to what he releases. That wasn't the case. Arturo alluded to a little while ago that he thinks that Silver and Gold is the last of the great Neil records. I disagree. I think it's 2003's Greendale. That is a marvelous record. It's a weird record, but it's worth talking about a little bit here, because our last entry on this list, our 10th list entry, is something that was released here, I think it was in 2020, called Return to Greendale, which is a note-for-note live version and rendition of the album that was recorded September 4th, 2003 at the Air Canada Centre in Toronto. I mean, this is an album that was made for arenas. But Greendale, so let me just do the straight talk of, or the straight narrative or the summary of what the album's about. So basically, it's a small, sleepy, one-horse town that, isn't really growing too much with the times. And you've got Grandpa, who's, yells at the TV and yells at the newspaper. You've got the farmer and his wife, and they've got their kid, but their kid is a little bit of a rebel. And one night he's out trying to, ship some drugs, gets stopped by a cop. Cop gets shot and killed. And the media converges upon the family's house of the family of the murderer, and Grandpa especially just rages against the media and how exploitive they are and blah 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 blah. Well, the young daughter, a woman named Sun Green, she gets so alienated, she goes on the run and tries to save the planet. Literally, she ends up in Alaska for a closing number called "Be the Rain," where it's talking about the ecology and about celebrating what we're about to lose because of climate change. Now that sounds like garbage when I talk about it, but it's a really, really, really great record in the sense that so Frankie San Pedro sits out, and it's just Neil with Billy Talbot and Ralph Molino. This is the studio record, and it's them. It's more or less it's Neil sort of telling the story, and then even supplying voices to the characters in it. And it's not so much song so much as just like these riffs, and it just kind of like repeating the riffs so that he can do the performance. But it adds up, and it gets really hypnotic. And again, there's some kick-ass soloing. There's some really nice harmonica stuff on it. There's an acoustic ballad in the middle of it called Bandit, which I've always liked. And then he's got one of his 20 best songs ever on it called Carmichael, which is a 10-minute plus long song about the cop that was shot and about his wake and about his wife's grief. It comes out of nowhere, but it's a really affecting, really moving song with just wonderful soloing and just wonderful lyrics and just a really great melody to it. So I'm a huge fan of the record. I think that there's another song on it called Sun Green, where we kind of meet that character that just bashes the fuck out as well. And so you get that, and so where I'm going with this, eventually he went on tour with this. And boy, did he really go on tour with this. And it's again, it sounds corny as hell, but he had actors out, they would perform kind of in the dark.
I've seen the video. It's really corny, dude.
Yeah. And they would have actors mouthing like acting out the lyrics or like mouthing what Neil Young is saying. And it is really, really corny. It's really just sort of, in a way it's kind of ridiculous, but I think purposely ridiculous. And so it's kind of like, let's have a performance. And it's almost like he's making a like macabre theater out of what he's doing. And so, the part of it is, but, part of the thing about Greendale, the way it plays is it's so earnest in spots. You're not actually sure if it's a satire or not. I mean, the grandfather character, yes. But like Be the Rain, I don't think is satire. Carmichael is not satire. But so this live version, Return to Greendale, it's the same record, but it's just done a lot better, out of the confines of the studio. It's a lot more resonant. I think it's more slow burn. There's more passion in Neil's voice. I think there's more consistency between the songs. There's less gimmickry in the production. I think Brendan O'Brien might have had something to do with the production. And so, just him playing it and just doing it straightforward really lends it an air of gravitas. I think it needs to be heard. I think it's one of the great lost albums of the aughts. And like I said, in my opinion, Neil's last great record. I know that there's people out there that think Psychedelic Pill from 2009 probably deserves.
I think that's 2014, I think.
2014. Okay. Yeah, I'm confusing it with.
And I agree with you. That album, Psychedelic Pill, is really not that good. It's just.
Yeah, there's some people that like it. I don't. I think it's plotting. And so, but I would say that this is the last great record, and this live version is definitely worth checking out. As a matter of fact, I would just say, skip the studio record and go right to the live record. It's great.
Yeah, the album, it's the studio album. I've never been as enthusiastic about this album as you are. It's your classic Neil Young and Crazy Horse sound, but with more sentimental, surprise, surprise, toast leaking over, sentimental, faux nostalgic lyrics about an idealized America. Oh, the humble. Oh, the salt of the earth. Oh, the forgotten working class. Yawn. But yeah, I'll grant you the live version of this album has a little more kick and energy than the studio recordings. Nevertheless, this was the period in Neil's career where he started to get too preachy and sanctimonious for his own good. And also, whether live or in the studio, the Crazy Horse vibe just lacks the fire that it had just 13 years earlier, and as we've already discussed. I mean, these guys are in their 60s by this point, it's like, okay,
Yeah.
I'd rather hear, younger acts who are more inspired by Crazy Horse, take the torch, from them at this point.
Yeah, and I think that Neil kind of plays his hand on that, because notice that of all the archive stuff that's come out, this is actually, I think, like the latest in time,
right?
Of at least the live album releases, and
right,
and even the studio releases. He doesn't have anything that I think he's released post 2003. Now I don't know if he's got plans to or not, but this is pretty much the end of the line to there. So what we've just covered, folks, takes us from 1969 through 2003. These are 10 of the highlights that we definitely recommend. I think for me, I think that the high points would be Tuscaloosa, High Flying, which is the Ducks record, and Way Down in the Rust Bucket, which is the Rag of Glory show. Do you have any? What would you be your personal favorites from the list, Arturo?
Yeah, some of these I have in my personal collection. Obviously, Way Down in the Rust Bucket, the 1990 live show, the Tuscaloosa show, the Fillmore East 1970 show, and the Royce Hall show is good, but give me Toronto 71. I'll take that one.
Okay. Yeah, got you. Yeah, I chose Royce Hall because of the Sugar. Ultimately, it was the Sugar Mountain bit that really did it for me over that. So, if you want to do your own research, folks, a good starting point is there's a Wikipedia page that kind of gives an overview of all the pieces so far that have been released and are planned to be released from the archive set on Wikipedia. We will link to that page in our show notes that we post when we put up our episodes. And I would say that would be a good starting point. And then, just go to Neil Young channel. It's just one word, Neil Young channel on YouTube. And literally everything Neil's pretty much ever released is on that channel. And so you can spend as much time as I did, plumbing through the archives and picking out these records. You really can't go wrong with any of these. It's just it really paints a picture of a singular artist and my favorite solo artist of all time. With that said, folks, like we do at the end of these episodes, we encourage you to join our Curmudgeonly community on Facebook. It's a fabulous page. Paul Margock just released or just put up his own post. Thank you, Paul. That we need more of that. It's pretty vibrant for those of us that are frequent flyers on there. Arturo continues to release his all-time great studio records by year. 1994 is up next. So check us out there. Facebook.com/group/curmudgeonrock. Also, shoot us a line if you have any quibbles with what we've said here about the Young Archives, or if there's something that you think is better or more notable than anything I've said. curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. We're still on Twitter, although not as excited as we used to be about it. There's still a few good follows, like Mike Mills from REM. He's a great follow, but that's starting to whittle away. And then we'll likely put together some Spotify playlists. We owe you a few, folks. We're aware of that. So look out for those here in the coming days.